Thank you for joining us for today's morning keynote session at CAR MBS 2020. This morning's keynote session is sponsored by the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. During the session, all audience members will be muted to ensure a quality user experience for everyone participating. Please also take a moment to visit the virtual exhibits in the exhibit hall. If you would like to earn CEU or PDH credits for participating in CAR MBS, please visit our MBS page on our website at www.cargroup.org to access the registration link for CEUs or PDHs. Don't miss today's Power Lunch session hosted by PwC at noon. Once again, thank you for joining us today. I'm pleased to welcome session moderator, CAR President and CEO Carla Walker-Miller.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you're joining us today. I hope those of you who have been present in the morning sessions have found them very informative. I know I joined sessions on sustainability and electrification, and of course, I thought they were excellent. But I'm so excited about our first keynote speaker of MBS. And I'm gonna read her bio, and I think it will make you equally as excited. Carla Walker-Miller is the founder and CEO of Walker-Miller Energy Services, a 20-year-old values-driven company that changes lives through energy by reducing the utility burdens on families, creating jobs, and decreasing harmful greenhouse gases. Started in 2000 after an 18-year corporate, Carla's company nearly collapsed in 2010 during the recession. She reinvented by successfully pivoting from electrical equipment sales to the energy efficiency industry. To date, Carla has molded Walker-Miller into one of the largest African-American and women-owned energy waste reduction companies in the country. Determined to create positive change, Carla is a visionary who leads with both empathy and tenacity. In 2018, she made 3 transformational decisions. First, instituting a $15 an hour minimum wage. Second, resolved to only recruit team members who embrace the company's culture of kind excellence. And third, adopted second chance policies that give people with criminal records fair opportunities for employment. A longtime Detroit booster, Carla champions diversity of all forms and aggressively recruits and trains a workforce that reflects the rich diversity of the communities her company serves. She believes the representation of all voices emphasize our humanity, drives sustainable policies, and creates equitable opportunities for all. I'd like to welcome Carla Walker-Miller to give her thoughts to our audience. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Carla. Thank you for inviting me to speak here. This is an incredible opportunity. I am going to take this opportunity, given by the circumstances of where we are in this country and in life, to go a little deeper than I normally do. There's an African proverb that says, until the history of the hunt is written by the lion, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. I am the founder of an energy efficiency services company dedicated to changing lives through energy efficiency. And in 2019, we went into more than 30,000 homes, and with our own core driven values, brand of service, we did change lives through energy efficiency. Part of our company culture is that we are stewards of the livelihoods and the well-beings of our customers, our team members, and our communities. But as blessed as I am to be a business owner in an incredible industry, which is energy efficiency, I'd like to provide you some perspective because I am not an entrepreneur by choice. My goal was always to have a corporate career. And as I entered my corporate career as a degreed engineer in the body of a Black woman decades ago, I really didn't have the context to realize that there were additional unwritten responsibilities implicit that were required in order for me to be successful. And those responsibilities should have been written because they still exist today. because no matter how hard I worked, I didn't have the context to understand that part of my success depended upon the strategic imperative that I behave as if I was okay. I behave as if I was treated fairly every day, and that I learned to push through as if daily injustices of being an engineer in a technical environment did not exist. From unconscious and unintended bias to plain old sexism and racism, part of my job was to pretend that those things were not real. So upon hire, unknowingly, I became subject to an unspoken deal with corporate America. That deal was I would pretend that I had the same opportunity, the same compensation, the same opportunity for retention, reward, and advancement as every white male engineer. And as I found my bearings as a hypersensitive young woman, the pretense, the necessity to be strong, to push through, started immediately. And in my head, even now, there are vignettes of dozens of situations that still stick with me. I remember once that upon writing an analysis about the energy equipment industry, I got a call from my manager who asked me who really wrote the paper. And I had to defend the fact that I wrote it. And not only that, I had to move on and act as if that was a perfectly reasonable question, that it was perfectly reasonable for him to ask me who wrote the paper. And things like that continued over and over again. And in order to keep going, I had to experience them and to forget them, to move on. As my mother used to say, learn the lesson and lose the pain. And one of the other things is I remember that some kind soul in HR, this was probably midway through my 18-year career, anonymously slipped me a copy of what was in those days the secret compensation table, with a note showing that I made significantly less than every white male engineer. And what I had to absorb is, after a correction was made, my boss said I should be really pleased with my new salary, not realizing what it felt like to have been marginalized for more than a decade before the adjustment was made. And by the way, women still have to operate as if it is okay for it to be legal for us to earn less than men for the same job. So for me, the corporate experience was much more like the original Shark Tank. No investors, only real sharks and waves in deep water, where the only goal was to win at any cost. But the fact that I navigated, and millions of people navigate this unspoken compact with corporate America, is still true. And at the same time, we're navigating similar rules of society that state that when I have to come to work, my teammates don't know that I was accused of stealing a dress in a high-end boutique the evening before. And I can only attribute that accusation to bias. And at a pro golf club, at a business event, my right to even be at the golf club was challenged. And I had to continue to move in that business event. And the number of times I, dressed professionally and conducting myself with the utmost of decorum, have been asked to literally refill a drink, correct a food order, or give directions because I was a Black face in a very, very white environment. And while at it, just to make it interesting, I also had the obligation to pretend that the Detroit school in my neighborhood provided the children of Detroit with the same education my colleagues' kids were receiving in the suburbs. In 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education began the process of desegregation. By most accounts, and most studies, school systems are as segregated, if not more today than they were then. And this is during a time when a child's zip code is a more accurate predictor of health disparities, educational attainment, economic opportunities, and even mortality. But I digress. Back to my story. When I left corporate America 18 years ago, having been told in ways spoken and unspoken that I was not particularly suited for the rigors of business, having fought the good fight, I left exhausted and traumatized from the very effort to convince people to see past their own unintended biases. And let's up the ante that one of the memories of when I was really overwhelmed with work, I had a health issue and went to a suburban hospital in the middle of the night. And unfortunately, I also left that hospital in pain after being profiled. After one ER doctor had prescribed an oral painkiller, another intervened, very, very concerned, and a kind nurse explained that they had decided I visited that hospital in the wee hours of the morning seeking drugs. And well, since no one ever really knows if I was really in pain, I would need to stay there overnight to receive the painkillers through IVs. So stunned, I left the hospital, fought through the physical pain, which eventually subsided. What took much longer was the emotional distress of that particular experience. And I tell you about it because it reminds me that even in the healthcare ecosystem, even with insurance, unintended biases permeate and contribute to worse outcomes for Black people. So this perpetual deal that we have with corporate America has the best chance ever of being disrupted right now, I'm happy to say. In June of this year, in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, and with the backdrop of protests for police reform and racial justice, I wrote an open letter to fellow CEOs, many of whom had come to me asking advice and having deep conversations, and who had concluded that, yes, it is okay to say Black Lives Matter. I suggested in that letter that all major corporations make some of the same decisions we made in my company so that Black families had more opportunities, that they change corporate recruiting, hiring, and promotion practices, that they spend procurement dollars targeted to more Black and diverse communities. And most importantly, I urge those leaders to invite Black voices into the room where decisions were made. Business decisions often disproportionately affect not just those businesses, but cities and the surrounding communities. They set agendas for the ecosystems. And it's a fact that people who make those decisions in the absence of diversity sometimes don't have the context to understand the ramifications of those decisions. As Carla said, we made decisions that forced us and drove us to have a more diverse group of workers. And the first time in the wake of the environment that we're in right now, after George Floyd's murder, I heard a corporate leader say the words Black Lives Matter. I couldn't help but tear up because those words are core to not only my journey, but the journey of so many Black and brown people. As a former Sunday school teacher, my current favorite scripture is Proverbs 4:7, and it talks about wisdom. Wisdom is the thing. Get wisdom, but in all that getting, get understanding. So as a person who is a hypersensitive personality, I'm an empath and I feel everything. And as a natural introvert, even though I've learned to operate as an extrovert because that's necessary, I have a unique ability to feel the energy and to want to do consistently what's best for any group of people. One of the reasons I have this unique opportunity to speak to you and to share my story, the good, the bad, and the ugly part of my story, excuse me, is just that the last 5 months of our lives have really been disorienting. As an American, as a Black woman, as a mother, as a human, as a Detroiter, I, like so many Americans, I am feeling emotionally raw, disquieted, and unsettled right now. But the fact that we are attending a conference and going about our daily business speaks to our resilience and to the power and the importance of intentionality, of us being extremely intentional right now. This conference delves into matters of research and sustainability and connectivity. As we talk about connectivity, we are experiencing disruption of everything, disruption of our traditional business cycles and businesses. And typically disruption is celebrated as the cost of progress, but disruption occurs when the structure of an entity is fundamentally altered. And right now, even in these confusing times, we have the opportunity to celebrate that the structure of racism right now is being fundamentally altered. And everything is connected more than ever with the backdrop of a pandemic and the unrest and the progress that we're making. We are more aware of the fact that we are connected and that our fates are intertwined, that our interests are, in more ways than we've ever realized, aligned, that our stories converge at some point, even if only briefly. If the past 5 months have shown us anything, it is that we are connected, but also that you don't have to lose for me to win. You see, one of the reasons I have this unique opportunity to share my story at this forum is that George Floyd was tragically murdered on May 25th, and that the protests to end police brutality and advance the cause of racial justice started shortly thereafter and have not ended. As a result, my life, our lives, and our collective realities are fundamentally altered. If you fast forward 3 short months from that day, a day of heartbreak for Mr. Floyd's family, there has been so much reflection, pain, blood, sweat, and tears. But we have now landed at a place where almost universally there's a recognition that the long legacy of systemic racism exists. And it has shaped the way this country and the world sees Black people. When I think back over 3 months ago to May 24th, I was personally distraught as a Detroiter, where people were being sick and dying in record numbers from COVID-19. Only the perfect storm of COVID-19 disproportionately ravaging the Black community, and the heightened emotions of our experiences being stuck in homes to literally stave off death, and the continuous loop, the continuous replay, have driven the transformational changes in how we think about race. And our responses to the assaults on our hearts are what drove those changes, driven by our shared humanity and made possible through the wonders of modern technology. Research has shown us that diversity works, that all other things being equal, diverse teams outperform other teams in every venue. The value of diversity of thought as a profit driver is undisputed. The key is diversity of thought in the form of talented team members who reflect the customer base. And the automotive customer base obviously includes every single person who purchases, rents, drives, or rides in a vehicle. Also undisputed is the fact that ethnic and racial minorities are woefully underrepresented in all levels of the STEM workforce, one of the fastest growing workforces on the planet. And efforts to recruit Black people and women fall short, not just because there is a pipeline problem, which is recognized, but because there is no existing critical mass. That means there are few on-ramps for Black people and women of color. The dearth of Black people in STEM fields right now makes it harder for others to enter and to be successful when they don't have peers and colleagues in the existing ecosystem. Their experience is likely to be tainted by unconscious bias. So gender and racial diversity have been proven to drive innovation, improve financial outcomes, contribute to efficient problem solving, and increase creativity. The benefits are unlimited. And for Black women, the experience of gender discrimination are often compounded by the evil twins of racial and ethnic discrimination. When I was younger, I easily attributed things to racism, just plain old racism, because I was young. And while true hardcore racism does exist, and by the way, has been live and in living color on our TV and phone screens in the last few months, unintended biases drive people who would never consider themselves racist to make fair, unfair, and uninformed judgments about other people based on race. As leaders, we are invited to create the future every day in our companies, but we know that as we're creating that future, those futures, the end results will be disrupting existing ecosystems. And part of what we're experiencing right now is what disruption feels like to those who are being disrupted. Because today in every home, every business, every playground, we are experiencing transformational change. Our collective reality has changed in the space of a few short months, and we've never seen anything like it. We are being called upon. We are being challenged to look at our own organizations, our own boards, our own C-suites, departments, our own actions and our own choices, and say, yes, this is normal. This is how it has been. But is this right? Is this fair? Is this equitable? Is this just? And the biggest change, the tectonic shift, is the recognition, the reality that the racial justice conversation is a business conversation, a conversation that must be woven into the new attire of corporate America. So while we're driving visions for the future of mobility, we have to think differently, not just about the future, but of the presence. The fierce urgency of the now is upon each and one of us. Years ago, I started teaching young Black entrepreneurs that instead of challenging what people knew and opinions, a helpful phrase is "my experience has been," because people can deny so many things, but no one can deny a person's own lived experience. For many Black people, and for Black people in general, until a few short months ago, we lived in a country that denied our lived experience. Carla mentioned that I pivoted to energy efficiency after nearly going out of business during the recession. And no one can predict what happens in life or in business. So when we made it through after the recession, the last couple of years have been actually very successful in energy efficiency. In 2019, we made massive investments in our organization, and we saw 2020 as our year for growth. We made plans for this to be a year for growth. And being a company of overcomers, our future, even though our present has us shaken emotionally, our futures are very bright. And honestly, made even brighter through the hope of the racial justice movement. Though unspoken, racial justice has always been an elephant in the living room of corporate America. And leaders can no longer relegate the conversations on diversity, on equity, on inclusion to the diversity, equity, and inclusion departments. These critical conversations are real and relevant to us as humans, and they must be had. And the necessity for including people, all people of every race, ethnicity, gender identity, economic structure is indisputable. And just as we learn new vocabularies when we change jobs and departments or industries, we have to stop resisting and learn vocabularies that respect people, our individuality, our humanity, vocabularies that reflect cultural competency and value people, period. So as I speak about the transformational movement, the tectonic moves in how we think about leadership occurring against the backdrop of our realities, of our unsettling realities, we can all say that now we know. Everyone who cares to know, everyone whose heart is open to knowing, knows. And people of goodwill are coming to recognize the immense amount of work to be done to bring diversity, inclusion, and yes, equity. The history of this country was written by the hunter. By understanding the truth about our history, we create better, more supportive, and more organic ecosystems. We, in a conference full of problem solvers, this is a conference full of scientists, researchers, solution seekers. I urge you to acknowledge the problems and embrace the possibilities and create solutions that unlock doors so that as we explore, as we work to understand. So my automotive insiders, my Lean Six Sigma gurus, we need a lot more root cause analysis. We need a lot of quality-driven processes to figure out how we can drive this industry, business in general, and this country to a more equitable, more fruitful, more fair, and ultimately more resourceful reality. This global movement is deep, and it's not to be defined by any one organization or any one moment. It is to be defined by what we do from this day forward. And it is incumbent upon every one of us to do something. This is not a time to subscribe to simple answers. We're in this position because Black people did this. Black people do this. White people did this. Because there are no simple answers. After slavery, Black people moved from being an asset to being a problem to be dealt with. And in many ways, we've been treated as such since. It wasn't addressed then because it was difficult. And racism is even more difficult or as difficult and as complicated right now. But there are facts, there is context, there is cause and effect, there are actions and reactions. So while I celebrate the possibility that the myth of equality, of the level playing field, of the belief that our plight as a race is largely attributed to poor personal choices, those things are being disrupted, and we're invited to really explore and make space for seeing things differently. There are many who feel battered by the pace of change, but we can't let that cause us to be resistant to that change. We're all experiencing an all-consuming sense of imbalance because of where we are, because of the pandemic, because of the pace of change. But when equity becomes our normal, and when this pandemic is over, then we will all be better. So my call to action is to learn, to get understanding. As many of us are having the first real conversations we've ever had about race, particularly with people who are different than us. And we have so much hard work to do, but we can only solve problems we acknowledge. Like the story of the hunt, the history of the country has been documented from one perspective. We have an opportunity not to rewrite history, but to inform ourselves about the deeper truths of our history, the facts that have not been easily accessible, to get to a place of understanding and healing. With power, with leaders, you have the power to amplify and the ability to change the world. You are in one room, one department, one board, one company at a time. So my charge to you is, my charge to all people of goodwill is to be courageous, to boldly go, and to become the change that we all want to see in our companies and in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. That was absolutely fabulous. Thank you for sharing your story. It was sobering. It was uplifting. It was a challenge to, I think, everybody listening. And I really can't thank you enough for coming and talking to us today and sharing your story. I'm certain if you were live in front of our audience, everyone would be giving you a standing ovation. I have not heard such a heartfelt keynote since I've been going to MBS, and it's been going for several years. I have the pleasure to ask you a lot of questions, and just a little bit about my background. I was born in Ypsilanti in a 1,000 square foot home by an hourly worker who worked double shifts just to put food on the table. So I've also experienced a number of things, as any female in the automotive industry has. And I have a question first, and this is one that I often ask other women because we all had to make choices. There are things that you can choose to accept, and there are things that you can choose to fight. How did you decide, both in corporate and even today, what do you let roll off your shoulder and what do you choose to stand up and fight? And has that changed over the years?
That's one of the most powerful questions I've ever been asked. And to be honest, it brings up a lot of emotion for me, because I remember before I even stepped foot in corporate America, my first invitation for my first day at work was an invitation to stay at the Confederate Inn for 3 months in Athens, Georgia, where all new people stayed. And the first, I had to say, I cannot stay at the Confederate Inn. So before I even started my first day of work, I had to make a decision that simple. What do you fight and what do you just accept? And nearly every day, depending on the day, the week, and the environment I'm in, we are still compelled. We still have to make those choices. And we don't make the choice in a vacuum. We make that choice based on who we're speaking with, what environment, what room are we in, what is the context, what happened right before, what do we expect is going to happen if we fight? How is it not just going to affect me, but how is it going to affect the women, and particularly the Black women who come after me? Do we want to choose this fight? And will it make the people in power decide that Black women are just too difficult to deal with? So I make the best decision I can. just like you do, Carla, every single day with every single situation. And sometimes I suffer for calling myself cowardly. And sometimes I suffer for being in a fight. But it's as varied as the situation.
Yeah, it's always a tough choice.
Yes.
I know very well. And you always are thinking about that, being that front runner and groundbreaker, so to speak. Let me ask you about GM. Yesterday announced they were putting a new position in place, a chief diversity officer, a Black female. It's not the first chief diversity officer companies have put in place. Many companies have done it for many, many years. Effectiveness is probably dubious. What do you think needs to happen differently this time with this new appointee and in corporate America? If you're going to put somebody as a chief diversity officer, what do you need to do differently? How should they be involved? How should their voice be heard?
So diversity should not be seen as an independent entity. Diversity should be integrated in every single policy. And that absolutely comes from the top. If all was right with the world, there would never be a need for a chief diversity officer or a diversity and inclusion specialist. But those people, the chief diversity officers, have to be empowered. Too frequently, the diversity and inclusion position is twofold. Part of their job is to make the company look better on the issue of diversity and inclusion than they actually are. And the pressure on those executives, on the team members in that team it's horrendous. There is a horrendous amount of pressure to protect the company. At the same time, there is the pressure of having a whole group of people, meaning every level of diversity, every type of diversity funneled into one department. And sometimes the impact is that other opportunities, if the opportunity is not an opportunity earmarked for diversity, then the same people who should be helped by the effort are hurt because they don't have access to the opportunities that are non-diverse. I don't want the diverse energy efficiency business. I want an opportunity for all the diversity, all of the energy efficiency business. That is earmarked for diversity to make corporate goals, and that is just open, wild, and free range. And we have to make sure that we are not allowing the infrastructure and the targets to actually limit opportunities.
The one thing that I often hear is we're as good as everybody else. We benchmarked everybody else in the automotive industry and we're as good as they are, so our diversity is good enough. How do you get rid of that stigma of, I'm just going to benchmark my peers and I'm good? How do you set your own bar?
I am not the one to tell a corporation how to set their own marks. Corporations do it every day. Whatever they did last year, the goal is to do better. The goal is for exponential growth. No one wants to say, oh, we're the same, we have the same revenue as we did last year, so we're good. Or we have the same revenue as our competitors, we're good. We are always striving for continuous opportunity, continuous improvement. We are always striving to reach farther. And until there is full equity in your organization, until there is no longer a need for a diversity and inclusion department, you have a lot of work to do.
Tell me a little bit about your editorial and why you chose to write it. What kind of feedback, positive, negative, anything surprising that you've heard as a result of that?
Yeah, when I saw people, the most diverse group of protesters that any of us have ever seen on the streets marching, it made me realize that everyone has a role to play. There was Gil Scott-Heron said, no one can do everything, but everybody can do something. And I had been in conversation with so many CEOs, many from large companies, and we were having conversations that we never had before. And they were saying, what can we do? And I wanted to, I actually wrote it first for my company because, our company is made of humans and we were struggling personally. But I wanted to let CEOs who have the power to do something different, to know that these are issues of humanity. These are issues of economics. These are issues of equity that start by, if you don't believe that the people that work for you deserve to have a decent life, and most of the people in this room understand that $15 an hour barely affords a decent life. I mean, it's just obvious to us. If you don't respect them enough to pay them a decent wage, then you can't say Black lives or urban lives or poor rural white lives matter. If you don't care enough to give equal opportunities to the least of these, to reach in to people who maybe were incarcerated, to people who've been unemployed for a long time, then you don't care. So I just saw it as such a unique opportunity to say, you all have the power. You change communities. Every corporations change communities. You know, you talk about a business owner or a CEO, but they make decisions through, you know, foundations, through supporting issues, where they throw their weight. They make decisions that change lives every day. So if you believe that Black lives matter, if you believe that any and all lives matter, which we do, then do something. Behave as if you do. Do what you know to do. Do what you do every day. Only be intentional to target it to people who are normally either not affected at all or negatively impacted by your actions.
Great, great words. And as I was reading also your bio, the fact that you hired, you know, people who had been incarcerated. On a personal note, my son has his own business and he also does the same. And I was quite concerned at first. And he said, no. He said, it works very well. And he said, they're some of my best employees. So how do you get over that bias, you know, that it's too dangerous, I can't bring them into my workforce? And how do you convince the rest of the team that it's perfectly fine?
So the reason I'm glad you asked that question is that took a journey. You know, I'm of a certain generation and a certain belief that if you've been incarcerated, there is something fundamentally wrong to you. But we have the ability to change. And my journey, the complications of the criminal justice system and the over-policing of Black and brown people is just so clear. I don't even think I need to talk about that. But our philosophy is, if I interview you on that first interview and I'm not interested in you based on the interview, whether you've been incarcerated or not is none of my business, because I'm not interested in you. So why do you have to disclose first off? Why do you have to feed into a bias I may already have by saying, oh, by the way, I've been incarcerated? And I joke with my team because I had to bring them along. There's a difference between someone who was convicted, who had a weed conviction at 20, and someone who has 7 bodies buried in his mother's basement. And a felony conviction encompasses all of that. So if I am interested in you, you have an opportunity to tell your story, to say, yes, I have a conviction, and this is what happened. And I have an opportunity to choose you. And that's all that we're asking, is that people who have served their sentences have opportunity.
Let's talk a little bit about education. We are seeing such disruption in education, and with the pandemic, there's a great concern that those school districts that don't have a lot of funding are those that, again, are going to be most at risk, because these students will probably have to come to the classroom, as will their teachers. We have recently seen some colleges now forego ACTs and SATs because it's been reported for a long time that those are biased, and it's very difficult for children in underserved populations to be able to do well on those standardized tests, which is a huge, huge change and much needed change. What shall we do about education so that, you know, we can have equal opportunity for everyone, regardless where their education begins? What has to fundamentally change?
Man, if I had the answer to that, I would not be sitting in front of you. The education conundrum is so steeped in racial justice, in economic disparities. It is going to have to be peeled back, and there are people who study it. I'm going to remove the pandemic issue from the education issue because education was so broken even before the pandemic. And when you add the risk of death to the equation, that's just, where do you take that? But it is true that under the system that we're in, there are cities and states whose children have been woefully undereducated for as long as there's been education. So I'm hoping that as we are discussing where we are and why we're here as a country, that the criminal justice system, the education system, that all of these ecosystems will be broken down and torn apart and revamped and reimagined so that we can all have the opportunity to be successful, equal and equitable opportunities for success.
Excellent. Yes, I wish I had the answer about educational opportunities as well. What can those people who are listening now in the audience do to get more youngsters excited about a career in STEM? What can we do for the underserved school districts differently or specially that's not happening today to get more and more students realizing the opportunity, not only in STEM, but in automotive?
On some level, many of the things that need to happen are happening now. What needs to happen though is that those opportunities need to be scaled. There need not to be an effort to bring young girls back into math, because if we were really focused on the effort, we would never allow them to disengage in the first place, right? If we were really looking holistically at what schools and communities needed, then everyone who's watching this conference right now would be in a school, would be talking to a teacher, would be strategizing with a school system or a board or a nonprofit trying to address the issues. So I hope that we can get behind some of the amazing organizations who already know, who already have had success engaging girls and diverse populations, and help them to scale those efforts so that we're not still talking about this 10 years from now and making very little progress. So, the number of girls in STEM and the number of women in STEM careers has barely changed since the 90s, in spite of all the efforts. And that is mind-boggling because we know how much work is being done. So to identify the work that is the most impactful and scale it so that it is a foregone conclusion that you are going to get support no matter what school you're in, no matter what school district a young girl is in, that is part of the solution.
Yeah, indeed. It's shocking to me to see the numbers that are just not improving, especially in engineering and in mechanical engineering, which I happen to be. And I would say in electrical and others, we're just not seeing those changes. The other part of that solution, I believe, is we need to have professors and others that look like the people that they're trying to educate, because I think sometimes we can be exclusive without realizing it. And that brings,
Carla, another thing that's interesting is that you need ecosystems in corporations, because what happens is when you put a 21-year-old Black woman into a company who only has white male engineers, there is no support in that ecosystem, and that woman is more likely to fall out and go to another company, find another career, because the environment is not welcoming at all or inclusive.
excellent, excellent point. So I'm so sorry to say this, but we're out of time. I wish I had a lot more, but I want to close with, I would love for you to basically tell everyone listening, we've all heard a lot of talk since George Floyd and other incidents have happened. what are the actions that you need to consider taking to really, really become part of the change?
You know, some of the actions can be as small as being that voice. You know, I have an assignment in every meeting I'm in that whether I want to or not, I have to say things that are in the interest of Black women because we're so underrepresented in those rooms. And look at the gap. Look at what needs to be said. Look at what needs to be said. And have the courage to say it. That's all. Look at what needs to be done and have the courage to create a strategy so that you can do it. But there's something for every single one of us to do to move this. We want to be on the right side of history. And I'm excited about what they will write about this time and about us.
Well, I certainly am equally as inspired by hearing what you spoke about, and it really is going to make me search deeper as well to think about what I can do differently henceforth. So really appreciate you being with us this morning. Again, thank you to the Alliance for Automotive Manufacturers for Automotive Innovation, my apologies, for sponsoring this. And I hope everyone continues to stay with us for the rest of the day. Thank you again, Carla Walker-Miller. I'm certain there is a standing ovation happening. We just can't see it.
Thank you so much,
Have
Carla.
a great day, everyone. Thank you.